Hello, this is a presentation that discusses the existence of high-hazard fire-adapted ecosystems in Mariposa County and specifically in the Mid-Pines area. These are some of the ideas that have occurred to me over the last 50 years or so. What do we mean when we say fire-adapted ecosystem? A fire-adapted ecosystem is one that has evolved both with regard to structure and vegetative content to allow regeneration over time following a wildfire disturbance. The ecosystem may depend upon fires, in fact, from time to time to maintain its health. The time for an area to regenerate varies. Some recover quickly, like 5 years or so. Some require much more time. Some fire-adapted ecosystems present a fire hazard to adjoining areas. So what is a high-hazard fire-adapted ecosystem? And this is opinion, not fact. A high-hazard fire-adapted ecosystem is one that recovers very quickly from a wildfire. It could be as quick as 5 years, maybe 10 or maybe 15, but it's capable of hosting a wildfire every 10 to 20 years. Importantly, it has vertical steepness. That is to say, if you have an ignition down in a lower elevation, the fire moves uphill with a much greater speed than it would move downhill. The area contains a heavy fuel load composed of highly flammable fire-adapted vegetation species. And we'll talk about what those are in a minute. The vegetation species may require periodic fires to regenerate. And most importantly of all, it adjoins, that is to say, it is next to, or even worse, below, an area that is populated and that is not as fire adapted. There are two examples of high hazard fire adapted areas in Mid-Pines. One of them is the Sherlock Creek watershed, particularly the lower half, and the Saxon Creek watershed, again, the lower half. There are others, though, throughout Mid-Pines and the rest of the county, because Mariposa sits at about an 1,800-foot elevation, and there's lots of bad country and lots of watersheds containing heavy fuel loads below where Mariposa town sits. I'm looking at a diagram here that essentially says that a dividing line exists at about 2,500 feet elevation. And this gets to my personal situation and where we have our property and where we live. Below 2,500 feet, we have vegetation that's highly fire adapted. It's fire loving, quick recovery. Ceanothus, chamise, manzanita, closed cone conifer, and scrub oak. In general, above 2,500 feet, at least in this particular area, it's a different ecosystem. It's not so well fire adapted. It's composed of mixed larger oaks and pines, sometimes heavy understory, slow recovery from wildfire, and most importantly, residential use. So we have a slope of about, maybe 40% from the 1,200-foot elevation where the Merced River is up to where Sherlock Road is and the residences on Sherlock Road. This map is the Detweiler Fire Operations Map and its final version, and I want to point to the Merced River, which is down here, and Saxon Creek, which is down here, and Sherlock Creek, which flows along there, and our place, which is right there. So you can understand why we think we're looking down the barrel of a gun all the time. Now, during the Detweiler fire, there was a very substantial effort with multiple bulldozers constructing fuel breaks. Now, these fuel breaks had been on a list of projects since about 2012, and there had been no action taken to build them. So the Detweiler fire, which is beginning to look like it's going to get us, caused them to mount this very substantial effort to build all these fuel breaks. And the particular one that I'm looking at here is one of the ones that was on that project list. So what does this say to the Mid-Pines Planning Advisory Committee, and what does it say about the Mid-Pines Area Plan and what it ought to contain? And again, this is just opinion, but there should be a strong correlation between land use designation and zoning and the areas with exposure to high hazard from wildfire, particularly those involving differences in elevation and the existence of fire-adapted vegetation. So here's an example. If there were to be a transition zone defined in the lower conifer oak areas just above the high hazard fire adapted areas, and it were to encourage or mandate, better yet, fuel reduction in this new zone to create a series of shaded fuel breaks, then we would have explicitly identified those areas needing treatment. We would provide priority targets for CFIP and EQIP funding. Those are cost-sharing contracts that are run by CAL FIRE and NRCS. And it would mandate treatment for new development in the transition zone. And I've just got to ask, why not? Why don't we do this? We're constantly rebuilding in flood zones, in fire zones, and it comes and gets us again. And the taxpayers have to shoulder the cost of recovery and restoration. It's ridiculous. So here's how we might get started. The Mid-Pines Planning Advisory Committee can vote to form a pilot project called Wildfire Transition Zone, or call it whatever you want. Establish a collaboration between the Mid-Pines Planning Advisory Committee, CAL FIRE, and the County Planning Department to design the zone, and it has to be designed by people who understand all of the different aspects of this, the ecological aspects, particularly fire ecology, and the planning department who understands the planning issues, and of course the Board of Supervisors, and seek funding for a pilot implementation.